No one fired a bullet. No soldiers marched. No bombs fell. Yet in 1956, an empire that had ruled a quarter of the world collapsed not by force, but by finance. And the weapon that brought it down wasn't a tank or a plane. It was the US dollar. This is the forgotten story of how the United States Britain, as closest to likewiley, pushed the British Empire to its knees. A story of pride, betrayal, fear, and a single moment when the world learned that the age of empires was over. Stay until the end. Because what happened next didn't just change Britain. It changed the entire global order we live in today. In the summer of 1956, the British Empire still pretended to be mighty. Its maps were streaked with red ink. Its diplomats spoke with unshakable confidence, and its leaders believed that history still bowed to them. But behind the polished speeches and ceremonial parades, the empire was bleeding. Britain had never truly recovered from World War II. The victory of 1945 came at a cost. No one dared mention bankruptcy. The nation survived only because the United States kept it alive with loans that came with strings, conditions, and silent expectations. Still, in the minds of men like Prime Minister Anthony Eden, Britain was not a follower. Britain led the world. Britain made the rules. Britain decided its own destiny. So when Egypt's young and charismatic president, Gamal Abdel Nasser, nationalized the Suez Canal, a waterway that Britain once considered its imperial birthright, Eden felt humiliated. The canal wasn't just a route for ships. It was a symbol of who still controlled world power and who didn't. In London, the government panicked. Nasser must be removed. Eden whispered in private meetings, "We cannot allow a colonized people to dictate terms to us." But he couldn't move alone. The British Empire was a shadow of what it used to be. So Britain reached out to two partners: France, angry over Egyptian support for Algerian rebels, and Israel, desperate to stop cross-border attacks. Together, they planned a secret operation so risky, so dramatic, that they believed it could rebirth British dominance overnight. But there was one fatal flaw. They never told the United States, their most powerful ally, their wartime partner, their creditor. In Washington, President Dwight Eisenhower watched with cold eyes as his allies plotted behind his back. To him, the world had changed. Colonialism was dying, and America wanted influence in the Arab world, not a British comeback. When Britain, France, and Israel finally launched their coordinated attack on Egypt, they thought the world would applaud. Instead, the world gasped. And Eisenhower felt betrayed. But he didn't need troops to respond. He had something far more powerful. He had the American dollar, and with a quiet stroke of financial pressure, he prepared to bring the British Empire to its knees. The attack began on October 29, 1956. Israeli paratroopers dropped into the Sinai Peninsula, advancing swiftly towards the Suez Canal. 2 days later, British and French bombers roared over Egypt, striking airfields and military targets. The plan was meticulously choreographed. Israel's invasion would provide the pretext for Britain and France to intervene, supposedly as peacekeepers, to separate the warring sides and secure the canal. It was a classic colonial playbook, but the world was no longer playing by those rules. In Washington, the news of the invasion landed like a thunderbolt. Eisenhower was furious, not just at the deception, but at the sheer recklessness of it all. The Soviet Union was brutally crushing an uprising in Hungary. The Cold War was at a knife's edge, and now his own allies were setting the Middle East on fire, risking a direct confrontation with the Soviets who were threatening to intervene on Egypt's behalf. Eisenhower picked up the phone. His calls to London and Paris were icy. He demanded an immediate halt to the military action. But Prime Minister Eden, convinced of his rightness, refused to back down. He believed America would eventually come around. He couldn't have been more wrong. For Eisenhower, this was more than just a geopolitical mess. It was a personal betrayal. He had considered Eden a friend. Now, he saw a man blinded by imperial nostalgia, dragging the world towards a potential Third World War. But sending American troops to stop British troops was unthinkable. Instead, Eisenhower turned to his Treasury Secretary, George Humphrey. His instructions were simple. yet devastatingly effective. Use America's financial might to stop Britain in its tracks. And so, the Quiet War began. The United States Treasury started selling off its vast holdings of the British pound sterling. It was a subtle move, but it had an immediate and catastrophic effect. As America dumped pounds onto the global market, international currency traders panicked. They saw the United States, Britain's biggest financial backer, losing confidence in the British economy. A massive sell-off began. Everyone started selling pounds, and its value plummeted. In London, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Harold Macmillan, watched in horror as his nation's currency went into freefall. Britain's gold and dollar reserve, the money it used to pay for imports like food and oil, were evaporating at an alarming rate. Millions were being lost every hour. Britain was hemorrhaging cash. Macmillan realized they were just days, maybe hours, away from total economic collapse. The country would be unable to pay for its most basic needs. The empire that had once financed global trade was now facing bankruptcy. Desperate, Macmillan turned to the United States for an emergency loan. He called the International Monetary Fund, an organization largely controlled by American interests. The response was brutal. The U.S. delegate made it clear: no ceasefire, no loan. The message was unmistakable. The tanks and soldiers in Egypt were irrelevant. The real battle was being fought on the currency markets of New York and London, and Britain was losing. The pressure was immense. Back in London, the cabinet was in chaos. Eden, exhausted and ill, was in denial. He couldn't comprehend that his American friends would do this to him. But Macmillan laid out the stark reality. He told the Prime Minister, "It is not the Egyptians who are defeating us. It is the Americans." The choice was simple: either withdraw from Egypt immediately, or face the complete ruin of the British economy. Pride versus survival. The past versus the present. For the first time in centuries, the British Empire was being told what to do, not by an enemy with guns, but by an ally with a checkbook. On November 6, just as British paratroopers were capturing key positions along the canal, the order came from London: ceasefire. The invasion was over. It had lasted just over a week. British and French forces had achieved their military objectives, but they had suffered a humiliating political and economic defeat. The soldiers on the ground were stunned. They had won the battle, but their governments had lost the war. Eden's gamble had failed spectacularly. His health broke, and a few weeks later, he resigned in disgrace, his political career destroyed. The man who tried to restore Britain's imperial glory had instead presided over its final, definitive humiliation. The fallout was immediate and profound. The Suez Crisis was a public announcement to the entire world. The age of European empires was officially over. Britain and France were no longer first-rate powers capable of acting independently on the world stage. There were now only two true superpowers: the United States and the Soviet Union. And from now on, everyone else, including their oldest allies, would have to follow their lead. For Britain, the moment was a brutal awakening. The myth of its global power, so carefully maintained since the end of the war, was shattered. The country was forced to confront its new reality as a middle power, dependent on the United States for both its economic stability and its security. The special relationship between the US and UK was forever changed. It was no longer a partnership of equals. It was now a relationship between a superpower and its most important, but ultimately subordinate, ally. This shift led Britain to accelerate the decolonization of its remaining empire and turn its focus towards Europe. But the most significant legacy of the Suez Crisis was the rise of the dollar as the undisputed king of global finance. The crisis demonstrated that America's economic leverage was a weapon more powerful than any army. The ability to control the flow of money, to make or break a nation's currency, was the new face of global power. The United States had shown it could bring its closest ally to its knees without firing a single shot. This cemented the dollar's role as the world's primary reserve currency, a status that underpins American influence. To this day, every international transaction, every barrel of oil sold, every loan granted, became intertwined with the American financial system. So, the next time you hear about currency fluctuations or international trade disputes, remember the story of 1956. It is a reminder that the greatest battles are not always fought with bombs and bullets. Sometimes, the most decisive weapon is the one in your wallet. The Suez Crisis wasn't just the end of an empire. It was the birth of the financial world order we all live in today, where the quiet decisions made in a Treasury Department can be more powerful than the loudest declarations of war. It was the moment the pound sterling bowed, and the dollar was crowned king. Imagine this. It is 1956 British paratroopers are descending from the skies over Egypt, a show of force from a global empire. Back home in London, the public is ecstatic. Newspapers are filled with headlines about restoring national pride. The Prime Minister, Anthony Eden, smiles for the cameras, projecting an image of confidence and victory. He truly believes he's winning. But behind the closed doors of London's financial district, a very different story is unfolding. Panic is taking hold. The war, meant to be a swift and decisive action, is hemorrhaging money at a rate nobody anticipated. Britain's oil imports, the lifeblood of its industry, are being choked off. Global trade is grinding to a halt. The pound sterling, once the world's reserve currency, is in a free fall. With every passing hour of the conflict, another brick is pulled from the foundation of Britain's economic stability. And across the Atlantic, in the White House, one man is watching all of this with a calm, calculated gaze. President Dwight D. Eisenhower. He understands the real battlefield isn't in Egypt, but on the world's financial markets. He doesn't need to threaten with aircraft carriers or send a single American soldier into the fray. His weapon is far more subtle and far more devastating. He turns to his Treasury Secretary and gives a simple, chilling order. Cut off the financial lifeline. Almost immediately, the United States begins a coordinated financial assault. They start dumping their vast holdings of British government bonds, flooding the market and cratering their value. The effect is instantaneous. The value of the British pound, already weak, plummets. It's a full-blown currency crisis. Desperate, the Bank of England makes an urgent plea to Washington, begging for an emergency loan to stabilize the pound and prevent a total economic collapse. Eisenhower's response is cold and unequivocal. No. He delivers an ultimatum, not through diplomatic channels filled with polite language, but through the brutal logic of economics. The message is clear. Withdraw your troops from Egypt now, or your economy collapses. For Great Britain, this is a shock unlike any other. It is arguably the most ruthless diplomatic maneuver the country has ever faced. The very nation that had stood with them as an ally, the country that helped save them from Nazi Germany in World War II, is now the one with its hand around their throat, quietly and efficiently suffocating them. Inside 10 Downing Street, the reality of the situation hits Prime Minister Eden like a physical blow. He's a shattered man. He paces the floors of his office, sleepless, haunted. He watches the financial numbers tick down, each point lost on the stock exchange, feeling like another bomb dropping on his nation's future. The grandeur of empire, the military parades, the confident speeches all evaporates in the face of this cold, hard, economic truth. For the first time, Eden and his government are forced to confront a reality they had long denied. Britain is no longer a global superpower, dictating terms to the world. It's a debtor nation. It's dependent. Its entire fate can be decided by a single phone call in Washington, D.C. The illusion of power has been stripped away, revealing the vulnerability beneath. The pressure becomes unbearable. The choice is stark. National pride or national bankruptcy. Finally, defeated not by an army but by an accountant's ledger, Eden gives the order he never thought he would have to give. Withdrawal. The retreat is swift. It's humiliating, and its impact shakes the world to its core. The British Empire, an institution that had spanned centuries and prided itself on being undefeated, has been brought to its knees. Not by cannons or rival fleets, but by economics, by a currency that wasn't even its own. The power of the US dollar has proven mightier than the power of the Royal Navy. As the last British soldier steps off Egyptian soil, a profound shift is felt across the globe. Everyone, from world leaders to ordinary citizens, understands that something fundamental has changed. A new era has dawned. The age of American dominance, long predicted but never so starkly demonstrated, has officially begun. And the age of Britain, the long, glorious, and often brutal, age of empire is over. The torch had been passed, not in a ceremony, but in a quiet, brutal, financial coup. The world would never be the same again. Thanks for watching. If you found this story as fascinating as I did, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into the moments that shaped our world. See you in the next one.